Friends, Romans, everybody all over the world, welcome to the 100th episode of The Thoughtful Bro. 100, baby. Who would have thought we could do it? Well, I thought so. The team at Mighty Blaze thought so. Thank you, everybody who's supported The Thoughtful Bro all along, internally and externally. It has been an epic ride, and I'm so grateful to everybody for supporting us. I'm so happy to have Ruth Madievsky here today, talking about her incredible Taking the World by Storm debut novel, All Night Pharmacy. This is going to be a choice 45 minutes. I've been listening to interviews with Ruth the last few days, and it's always a great interview. The book is fabulous. So just hold on 2 quick minutes while I do an intro, and then we'll get to Ruth. We at A Thoughtful Bro, as you know, are always live streaming to Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook on Tuesdays at 2, talking about what makes great books tick, what makes great authors tick. Mighty Blaze, if you didn't know, is an all-volunteer initiative that started during COVID to help writers reach readers virtually. And here we are going strong 100 episodes later. If you are in the mood to spend money, you don't have to spend it on a Mighty Blaze. We are, as I said, are all volunteer. Just like us, follow us, subscribe, tell your friends about us. That's how you show the love for a Mighty Blaze and The Thoughtful Bro. But if you want to spend money, please spend it on fabulous debut novels, critically acclaimed and commercially successful books about sisterhood, addiction, LA, and that time in your 20s when you're just trying to figure it out. Books like All Night Pharmacy by Ruth Madievsky with this beautiful cover, which another podcaster, I think the Day Beautiful, I forget his name, but he said it's like his favorite cover in the last 5 years or something. I mean, this cover is totally awesome. We'll talk about the cover on the interview. Anyway, folks, the book is called All Night Pharmacy, again, by Ruth Madievsky. We'll put links to bookshop.org in the chat to buy it. And now, a bit more about Ruth. She is originally from Moldova, and now she lives in LA, where she works as an HIV and primary care clinical pharmacist. Her debut poetry collection, called Emergency Break from 2016, was the winner of the Rolstad Contemporary Poetry Series and spent 5 months on the small press distribution poetry bestseller list. Her debut novel, All Night Pharmacy, is an instant national bestseller. It is an Indie Next pick, and it was named one of the best and most anticipated 2023 books by over 40 publications, including NPR, the Los Angeles Times, Vanity Fair, Vogue, Vulture, and BuzzFeed. And Kirkus called it an assured debut, at once atmospheric and gritty. Ruth, welcome to The Thoughtful Bro.
Thank you. So good to be here.
I know you're busy. You're like doing all this media, and here you are. And I think you even have something big tonight, right?
Tomorrow. I have.
Okay.
For a minute, I was like, it may as well be tonight. My brain is so Swiss cheese. Like, if you had told me I had another event in an hour, I'd be like, oh, that's right. I guess I forgot to get childcare for that. I'll just like fireman carry my baby to the reading. I have my only official virtual launch is tomorrow night, which is the 26th at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern through Loyalty Books. And I'm going to be in conversation with Nicole Chung, who is such an icon, and I was so excited.
Awesome. Psyched for you. Psyched for all the success. Now, you are in LA literally right now. Mm-hmm. Your darling newborn baby is like in the other room.
Yeah. Why do I like miss her? I saw her 20 minutes ago.
You can bring her out. No, then she might start crying. But I'm sorry, what's your baby's name?
Aria.
Oh, so cute. And you were so funny on social media. I mean, it's like worth following Ruth on Twitter just to like hear her talk about her baby. But I bring up LA because it's funny. I had Brad Listy on the show last week, and I was mentioning to him that I have had a lot of LA authors on. CJ Lead is another debut novelist. Mm-hmm. There's Carolyn Kepnes, who's like actually an old college friend of mine who wrote the series You. There's Tananarive Due, who is a professor at UCLA. And there's you. And I just feel like LA has just been all over my show recently. And I asked Brad this question, and he gave sort of a middling, non-committal answer, but I'm hoping for something more from you, which is, tell me about the LA book scene. Is it up and coming? Is it? The one other thing I'll say before you answer is that I saw somewhere in social media somebody saying, with the writer's strike, now all the screenwriters are like, well, I'm just going to write novels because in publishing, it's so great. But
I've kind of heard that through the grapevine, and I've been really curious about it. I think that's hilarious. It's like, oh baby, if you think you're going to make money doing that, like, can I interest you in going into a healthcare job instead, a stable immigrant career? That'll do you a lot better than trying to make it in publishing. The LA literary scene is interesting. I think because we're so spread out and there's so much sprawl and traffic, it always feels like such a more kind of loose scene compared to, I feel like whenever I look at my friends in New York's Instagram stories, it's always like a million people I know at different readings, and there's always a bunch of them happening on the same night, but it's like people I know at all of them together. Whereas in LA, it's I don't know, it's just kind of rough where because our public transit system is still sort of in transition, it's really a commitment sometimes to go to a reading on the other side of town. I mean, the inverse to that is that every time I have gone to a reading by myself at, like, let's say Skylight Books, which is one of my favorite bookstores, I always run into someone I know. And I've actually made some friends in real life after meeting them there and realizing, oh, we're Twitter mutuals, and introducing myself, which is it always feels a little cringe to be like, are you Daniel from Twitter? But it's like led to some real friendships. So I feel like our scene is
Daniel from Twitter.
The Daniel from Twitter. I'm Ruth from Twitter. Times I'm grateful to be probably the only Ruth Madievsky anybody knows, as people can't be like, oh, right, that one.
But I just feel like it seems like inevitable. I mean, LA is like, just sort of from a kind of grand historical perspective, a young city. And it's like, it used to, if somebody said 100 years ago that New York City would be one of the literary capitals of the world, everybody would have laughed, because at that time it was just Paris and London, et cetera. And like maybe 100 years from now, LA will be, the literary capital of the world. I don't know. I mean, like, why not? Because there's so many creatives out there already. Why wouldn't it just be a creative hub for this too?
I would hope so. And there's more than one would think. Like, I'm always like, oh, right, like Melissa Broder lives here, like Miranda July lives here, I think. Ruthie Thorpe lives like just outside of LA. There's so many writers. Otessa Moshfegh lives here. Like, it's like you sometimes forget that not everybody is in New York. And there's some industry people out here too. There's some literary agents out here. My publicist she's not in LA, but she's in San Francisco. So it's not everything is New York centric. And I'm glad you reminded everyone that, because I need to be reminded sometimes.
Oh, 100%. And one thing about LA, the reason why I bring up LA is not just because you live there and so on, but it's such a big part of this book. And, when I interviewed Brad and CJ Lead, both in the last kind of month or so, LA is really a figure in their books, particularly in CJ Lead's book, which is called Mayfly, for those who...
Yes. We've actually become friends.
Oh my God, great.
Through
CJ from Twitter?
CJ is friends with my friend Jean Kyung Fraser, who wrote Pizza Girl. Okay. I think that's how we met. Yeah, she came to a reading that I did with Jean, and Jean's the one who introduced me to my agent Mina, and I think Mina and CJ are friends, so it's all kind of like a beautiful mesh.
She's beautiful. All right, so LA to me in your book, it has this kind of such specific weirdness. It's just sort of unlike any other place in this hyper specific way. And I'm going to turn over the mic to you in a second to talk about that. But I just feel like, to me, from Boston, LA just seems like it's already in the future. It seems like it's already some kind of fantastical place. Like if I said to you, like, oh, I was in LA and I went to see this clown show that they sing only AI generated songs and serve homemade avocado fritters. And it's right next to that yoga place where there's a goat they do goat yoga. And I would be saying it as like a made up joke. And then you'd be like, oh, I love that place. Yeah.
No, I literally have friends who are in a clown troupe in LA.
So I guess it's just, what's interesting to me is like the way that people with real literary chops like yourself are like really coming at LA and bringing LA to the page. Like, do you feel, is LA, how does LA strike you as sort of a kind of rich but new kind of feast for the literary eye?
LA is such a contradictory city, right? Like it has these patches that are super yuppie and bougie, and you've got the kind of globe light chandeliers and the $3 each macaroons and the Michelin stars, but then literally on that same block you have like Skid Row basically. There's all these areas that were historically working class, where mostly people of color live, that are now becoming super gentrified. And the bar that I write about in my novel Salvation is sort of at the nexus of that rapidly gentrifying phase where you have some of the regulars who have been going there a long time mixing with, these like 20-year-olds checking in on Yelp for free avocado fritters. So it's a really contradictory city. You have so many people who come out here with this idea of making it in LA, right? Whether as an actor, a writer, or just as someone who, wants to live in a city where there's never a shortage of things to do, where there's lots of different industries you can work in. And, it's a city where you can kind of be anybody, which also means you can be nobody. And I think that's really terrifying. Rosecrans Baldwin has a book about LA called Everything Now that's really interesting and kind of covers a lot of the paradoxes of the city.
Yeah.
And I think that it definitely has a really great literary scene and a lot of really incredible bookstores and cultural centers. But yeah, I think that my main problem with it is that it's just because of traffic here, they're so spread out.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to figure out like what is the area in the city I can move to where I can be like a 20-minute drive from all of them. And I don't think that's possible. But yeah, it's just you meet really colorful, interesting people here. Like, so someone mentioned like there's so many psychics in your book, but like if you drive through LA, there's a psychic shop basically every block.
Mm-hmm.
You'll go to a bar for a friend's birthday, and one of their coworker's partner is talking to you, and they're like writing a screenplay with their gastroenterologist. And that's just like life here.
Oh my God. There was like some hilarious thing online that I watched ages ago where just like, it was like some guy, it was like sort of like for like the Tonight Show or something. And like some guy like camped outside like a supermarket, and he would just stop people on camera and be like, so tell me what your screenplay's about. And like every person was like, how did you know?
Oh
like,
my God, that makes me want to die. I didn't write this book too much in cafes. It was mostly written like in my own house, but like there's nothing worse for my self-esteem than being another person writing in a cafe with my like $7 latte, seeing everyone else doing it and feeling like I'm never gonna make it. We're all just sitting here typing our like millennial slacker novels.
Well, you did make it, so here we are, baby. All right, let's talk about the origins of this book. Now, my understanding is that you wrote a first line and you were like, bang, let's explore this voice. And like you just love voice-driven literary fiction. And it reminded me of, you do hear a lot of, I've heard that story before, that like people like begin with one line and they're just like, hey, let's see what this is about. Or I had a dream, or I saw this thing in my mind's eye, and I just had to kind of figure out like, what was the bull doing standing on top of the frying pan, and like whose frying pan was it, and so on. And there's, I think the most famous example, or one of, is Tolkien, who like once famously jotted on like the edge of this paper he was grading, in the hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. And he talked about that many, many times in his career, that he was just like, who is this hobbit? And, 1,500 pages later, we know. But just tell me about the origins of the book.
So I wrote the novel very similarly to how I write poems, because that's the only way I know how to write fiction or poetry, frankly. I never thought I'd be able to write a novel because it just felt so hard to come up with a scaffolding that works, a plot with through lines, all these arcs, all these A plots, B plots, C plots, things that pay off, suspense, pacing. It just sounded so hard. But I started off with this sentence, basically just looking for a voice I could listen to. And I started off with this sentence, spending time with my sister Debbie was like buying acid off a guy you met on the bus. And it had everything I like, which is a really kind of stylish, voicey, authoritative narrator, specificity. We're taking the bus. We're comparing it to acid. It's got that poetic vibe because we've got a simile in there. And basically, I just decided to try to write a whole book of sentences like that, where that kind of employ all the things I like in poems. So lots of really specific, what I hope to be arresting imagery. A lot of kind of metaphorical language, humor, dark humor, especially. I can't write anything that doesn't have some dark humor in it, unless it's like, a serious investigative piece. But even then, it's hard to not have some line that an editor has to tell me to cut because it's like totally off. Like, I make a joke when we're talking about like terrible healthcare disparities or something. But so it started off as a linked short story collection because that felt more doable. And, boy, was I wrong, because even though it was doable, like it was just a bunch of short stories copy pasted in a Word doc that were just not more than the sum of their parts. And it was not going to be a book that even I would enjoy reading that much, because we were hitting the same note a lot of the time. There just wasn't like, there was nothing greater happening than the individual stories just kind of banging up against each other. So then I basically tried to take the pressure off of myself about writing a novel and just said, okay, like just write, like just, we'll keep the copy pasted short stories as the first half of the book, and then just sit down to the blank page, open your notebook where I keep, images that are interesting to me, or sentences from other books where I like the syntax of it, or, oh, this person mentioned like a whale skeleton. Like, that's interesting. I never think about those. Maybe I can find a way to talk about that somewhere. I just kind of opened my notebook, started free writing, and then was kind of shocked that a whole first draft of the book came out in like 2.5 months just by free writing, basically. So the hard part was actually editing. That took about a year with my agent and then another year with my editor. But yeah, I basically wrote the way I do with poems, just kind of writing in search of beautiful, interesting sentences.
Oh, there's like so much to dig into there. I was talking with Nana Kwame Adjebrenya, who wrote Chain Gang All Stars, on the show about a month ago, and he was a student of George Saunders, who I also had on the show, and we were talking about this.
Speaking of beautiful sentences,
yes, this beautiful sentences thing, and sort of like the way that the beautiful sentence contains the DNA unconsciously for the larger narrative, and if you just sort of keep repeating the DNA sentence, then it will be like an unfolding protein that eventually creates an organic whole. And I feel like that was sort of, you sort of described that very thing in different words just now.
Yeah, it's interesting. People have asked me a few times if I believe in psychics or not, because there is an alleged psychic in my book. And I feel like, I feel like it's kind of irrelevant what I believe or don't believe. And, the book doesn't really take a stance on if she's a real psychic or not. It's kind of open to whatever the reader thinks, because she believes she's a psychic, and that's what's important. But I do feel like there is a psychic power sometimes in writing where, like you said, sometimes the prose knows what it's doing before you do. And the seeds are planted before they're at all kind of in my own conscious brain. So to me, yeah, there's kind of a magic and psychic clairvoyance to the writing process sometimes, where it's like, I'll read early drafts and I'm like, damn, that was in there from the start, and it took me 7 years to pick up that thread.
Wow, I love that. So you said in your acknowledgments about your agent, I think the phrase is something like, we edited this book within an inch of both of our lives. Something like that, which sort of
drama queen.
No, but bro, I've been there. So tell me, so clearly it was like an intense editing experience, and I'm just wondering, like, if you could summarize, like, take one or two basic things that sort of like, All Night Pharmacy would never have been the thing it is today if my agent hadn't pointed out this about my writing style, about the book, and so on.
Yeah. So when I say we edited it within an inch of our lives, it's not to say that it was an unpleasant process. It was more that we both come from immigrant backgrounds. We're both kind of young and hungry. I was one of her earlier clients. She was my first agent. This was my first novel. So we really wanted to get it right. And, a big thing that she pointed out to me was that, one thing that happens when you link a bunch of short stories together is that there can be a lack of meat on their bones, especially if you're trying to turn that into a novel, where in a short story, you can say something like, after I got sober, comma, and that level of concision and collapsing of time can be okay. But in a novel, it's like, the fuck? Like that's like a whole, like, 8 chapters or something, like collapsed into like one clause.
Right.
So she was really good at pointing out the parts where we needed to understand characters more. We needed more
causality.
Yeah, we need more causality, and that there were just decisions I hadn't made. I think it might have been Alexander Chee who said that, a mark of kind of early writing that's not yet at the stage where it's ready to be read widely is that you can tell when a writer hasn't made certain decisions yet. And that was totally me, as I would just write like a vibey poetic sentence rather than actually making a decision about, like, well, okay, but why does this character stay with this lame boyfriend? Or like, well, why is she attracted to this woman? Why are they in Moldova? Like, rather than explaining, I'd be like, ooh, vibey comparison to jellyfish. And it's like, that doesn't answer the question. It's just a dodge. And, as a poet, because you can always you're not as indebted to narrative. You can do that kind of shit in a poem and it's fine, but in a 64,000 word book that readers are devoting probably, I don't know, what do you think it takes to read my novel? Like 4 hours or something?
Mm, 6, 7.
Six?
It
Yeah.
depends. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
the audiobook
yeah,
is 8 hours, and that's like
yeah,
read slower than I think we
right,
would read it with our
right.
eyes. But if you're asking people to devote that much time to your book, it's like really unsatisfying if there's too much ambiguity, I think, for most readers. So that was
Well,
something we had to work on a lot.
well, one thing I would say is that in poetry, it seems like almost. I'm not a critic, and I don't read poetry enough to use the right terms for this. But what I want to say is, the part of the energy of some poems comes from the juxtaposition of things that seemingly are not connected. Like that sort of
Hmm.
lack of connective tissue is like actually a device of poetry. And
Yeah.
it's sort of a shortcoming in narrative because we need to understand why are these two things being mashed together, right? But
Yeah, especially if you're spending so much time with these characters, like you don't want to, I mean, the average reader probably, like they don't want to be left wondering, like, why did this character do any of the things they did? you know, um, you want to feel like, and it's okay to leave some things ambiguous, but you want to feel like the writer knows what they're doing. Um, like I have, I think, a pretty thick skin when it comes to reviews, and I have so much fun reading my Goodreads reviews, even the bad ones, because like I love like that kind of like parliament of Goodreads voice where people like purport to like know what the author is thinking. And I read this.
really, can you give me an example of like something like that? I don't want to
Yeah,
highlight any particular
yeah.
Goodreads reviewer, but
Oh, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, someone the other day, me and my husband read these for fun, and he'll be like, "Oh, new bad review just dropped," and we like have to read it and have fun with it. And like someone wrote something about how like Madievsky, like I think that they were complaining that like certain that there's not a lot of dialogue in some scenes that like Madievsky like doesn't know how to like hasn't learned yet like how to hasn't mastered it. So it was like trying to like write literary criticism, but it was kind of like a book report. And they're like Madievsky has not yet learned how to write scenes that are heavy in dialogue, and it's like, has she not learned it, or did she
has
make a
not yet.
stylistic choice? And I just have so much fun with that because you just know that that person was like really proud of like coming to that, like, coming to that realization. Like, that's fine.
I
like
like.
whatever's fun for you. Thanks for reading. Thanks for hopefully buying.
Oh my God, your attitude towards this is miraculous. Like, are you? I feel like I've literally never heard anybody say that. That I enjoy reading my bad Goodreads reviews.
I mean, I would feel crushed if someone said it in the New York Times, right? Or if it
Right,
was like a
right,
writer I admire. But if it's just like a random person writing on Goodreads, like, okay, like,
right, right.
it's like overhearing someone in the grocery store talk about, share a bad political opinion. It's like, okay, well, who are you? Like, that's fine.
Right. Oh, so healthy, so healthy. I feel uplifted. Your book has been getting crazy comps, interesting comps. Requiem for a Dream, Less Than Zero. One that I liked, or that I came up with myself, and then I saw somebody else did it, and I was like, I thought I was the only one to see this. Was Naked Lunch by William Burroughs.
Hmm.
There is a lot of I don't know, this kind of the kind of searching young person with like breakthrough drug and sex experiences.
Hmm.
What comp resonates for you?
So, I mean, I'm always really happy when people compare it to the work of Melissa Broder, like her new novel Milk Fed, because that is also about a young 20 something queer woman in Los Angeles trying to figure out who she is and becoming obsessed with another woman who she meets in the
Mm-hmm.
city, where they just, the power dynamics are kind of intriguing. Like in Melissa's book, the main character falls for this Zaftig Orthodox Jewish woman who works at her local frozen yogurt shop, and like a queer romance between women where one of them is Orthodox Jewish is already like fascinating. And LA is such an interesting place to kind of people watch different degrees of Jewishness, and I say that as a Jew. And the main character Rachel has an eating disorder that she's trying to work through, and so to be really attracted to this woman who just kind of eats for pleasure and doesn't seem to have any complexes around her body is, it's such an interesting and kind of healing dynamic for her. So, and Melissa's just so funny, like dark comedy,
Mm-hmm.
to the tens, and she writes about Jewish mysticism in a way that was really helpful for me when I was finishing up revisions. I read Milkfed after the book had already sold and while I was revising, and just the way that she talks about, um, kind of ancestral traumas and golems and these Jewish folkloric symbols in a way that it doesn't become the main kind of character of the narrative. It's
Mhm.
kind of texture and a thread. I thought that was really helpful because I find that often when you read books that have, um, a religious element like that, it can sometimes feel like that's the main scaffolding of the book. And
Mm.
I really wanted to set out to write a book where um, it wasn't any one thing that you could easily paraphrase. Like it's not just a sisterhood novel or an addiction novel or an immigrant novel or a queer coming of age novel. It's like an all night pharmacy. We've got all kinds of shit in here. Da, 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 da. I didn't come up with that. Someone said that to me in an interview, and I was like, "Bam, that's my answer for why I chose that as a title."
I love that. My favorite definition for the title is the phrase reason for the title is that like the main character, she is the all night pharmacy.
This is
Like,
true. Yeah, she's any
like
drug you
literally.
want, she probably has it or
Right.
can get it to you within 15 minutes.
All right. So another thing that has come up so much in the writing about this book and the interviews that you've done is the question of like, is this book autobiographical? Now, some may be like deeply annoyed by this question. You may be tired of answering it. But what's interesting to me, I wouldn't have really even brought it up, but there's like something interesting, I think, to say about it. So first of all, it's a contemporary novel set in contemporary LA about a young woman who shares some, biographical traits with yourself. And so you can understand why somebody might, at least wonder about that. But what's interesting to me is that the book is actually seemingly anti-autobiographical. It's like you are like, I mean, and this is correct the record after if I'm wrong, but I mean, just judging from other things you've said, it's like you come from this wholesome family and you have a great relationship with, not only your sibling, but with like all the other people in your family too. You like not only don't do crazy amounts of drugs in an abusive way, you actually are like a paragon of proper drug usage in the sense that like you help people who have HIV like get the right drugs to help with their illness.
Nice
I'm like,
say.
you're like this, like, you're what drugs ought to be, right? I mean, and so here we have this book, right? So here we have this book with like all this rampant dysfunction, family dysfunction, sibling dysfunction, drug use dysfunction, trauma. Yeah. My question to you then is this anti-autobiographical? And if it seems like you were sort of running from your autobiography, as it were.
That's so interesting. I've never heard the term anti-autobiographical, but I love that. I think somewhere in between, I do share some similarities with my narrator, though not so much the plot points of her life. A lot of the family lore as it relates to Soviet terror and the Holocaust, that's taken whole cloth from my family history. Some of it altered a bit because, the way it happened in real life didn't always serve the narrative as well as fudging some details. But other things like my great grandfather being murdered as an enemy of the state by the KGB, that like fully happened. And, the keys being torn off the piano, that image, like In Search of Jewels by the KGB, that apparently happened in my family when he was taken. So a lot of the family stories I put in there because I wanted to see them immortalized in some way, which, isn't to say that I think that my book is going to be read for hundreds of years, but like it made me feel good to put it in print and to feel like those oral histories that are so easy to lose or to totally butcher through immigration telephone, which I'm sure I did myself. I wanted to see them imprinted somewhere that wasn't just our memories. So that part definitely autobiographical. And then, the anti-autobiographical stuff being, kind of the drug, the various prescription drug schemes and things like that. Yeah, that's not my own life. There's no way I could be a practicing pharmacist with an active license if that were true. But, I love reading about grifters and schemers and scammers, and it just felt more doable to write about a pharmacy scam because I felt like I could kind of come up with one based on my own knowledge of how the laws work basically and like what you have to report to the DEA, the triplicate sheets, how to dispose of opioids and benzos. So that was fun to imagine.
All right. It was really well written, and I've always often wondered, frankly, it's a very specific question I've always had about drug abuse and opioid drug abuse. Is sort of like, how do the drugs get from the pharmacy out into the world, sort of when there are so many protocols seemingly to stop them from getting into the world? and now I know. So
I mean, the way that I wrote it, I think is probably a little chaotic. I don't imagine there's actually a network of a lot of people, stealing the expiring ones from hospital pharmacies. But other things like people selling their grandparents unused pain pills, that
yeah,
happens.
yeah,
And shady doctors who prescribe intentionally fraudulent prescriptions that people can sell and then that they can get a kickback from, fully happens.
right,
And then if they get caught, they just say like, "Oh, someone stole my prescription pad. I didn't write any
yeah,
of those." Like that happens.
right.
Um, yeah.
All right. And folks, just in case you're wondering, I mean, I'm not trying to make light of the opioid addiction. I mean, it is like totally a tragic situation. And it is tragically presented in this book. And so I think part of like, if I'm making light of it sort of manically right now, it's because I just finished reading this book last night and I'm like trying to like let off some steam because it is like, it gets into these issues in a big way, in a gritty way, in a rich way. So a few other topics I wanted to get into, and then we'll take a few audience questions. But just I want to dig down a little bit into the kind of this period of life in your 20s, okay? And just give me a moment to just set up this question, because like my 20s I remember as this like glorious time. I mean, it is like a time that like gloriously chaotic, right? Glorious in the way that like you're long in the distance, in distant past, like bad relationships are glorious, like gloriously stupid, gloriously confusing, all those kind of glorious things. And I remember in my 20s just feeling like there were certain people in my life, and I know who they are, I'm not going to name them, but there are a couple people in my life who were like totally living in a completely wild, unsustainable way, just a totally dangerous kind of life. And like you have some of your best lines are for the Sister Debbie. And just, I mean, there's a couple lines here that I just want to read. You could fall asleep spooning her and wake up with a screwdriver pressed to your throat. She was so alive, it was scary. And then there's another line. If you're not asking yourself, am I about to ruin my life at least once a day? You're not really living life at all. And these are like great lines kind of in and of themselves, but also I think they speak to the kind of this dangerous person who seems to be living in this certain way. And, one thing it reminded me of is On the Road, and the way that like the Dean Moriarty character in On the Road is sort of like, brings the Jack Kerouac character, whose name is escaping me right now, but the main Jack Kerouac character is being drawn along by Dean Moriarty. And like, he's always on these crazy adventures. Like, let's go to Mexico. Let's get high. Let's drive across the country tonight, And there's a way that I think a certain kind of person in their 20s, and frankly, I would categorize myself this way at a certain time in my life, where you're like, God, I'm not really alive. And if you're sort of searching for your own identity, this person who's living in this absolute dramatic, intense way can sort of seem like they are living life like the right way or a better way. And anyway, that's my setup to say, I think there's some of that going on here.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I remember watching like TV shows that take place in high school when I was in high school and being like, is that what I'm supposed to be up to?
Wait, like how do you mean? Like on the conservative side, or like the kind of like crazy
No,
side?
the like I'm really into the show Euphoria that's out right now, and it's like, damn, like these people have like experienced some shit, like before they're out of high school. It's like there's these weird like predatory age gap, like child porn, like horrible scandals where you're sleeping with someone who then turns out to be your classmate's dad, spoiler alert. Like there's so much, just so there's really intense opioid addiction, there's like gun violence, that there's just like so much shit happening that's like, oh man, in high school, I wish that's what was going on in my life, rather than just like playing on the tennis team and hoping someone would kiss me and studying for my AP exams, and taking my grandparents to the doctor. And yeah, I mean, with All Night Pharmacy, I started writing it when I was in pharmacy school, and kind of had that feeling sometimes like I'm missing out on the best years of my life, because I mean, college was like that amazing time of self-discovery, like it is for a lot of people, but then graduate school is just so the opposite, where for me at least, it's so much work. And I just felt like everyone else was kind of going out and having fun without me, and here I am just studying again, and being the first one to leave the party. And having so much FOMO about like what everyone else was up to. And then I finished the book when I was done with pharmacy school, done with residency, just working a regular kind of 8 to 4:30 pharmacist job, where for the first time I didn't have homework. When I finished work, I could just go home and do whatever I wanted. And and I was thinking a lot about these kind of characters who live, hedonistically, and how alluring it is to be around people like that, where that it might be the worst night of your life, but at least something will happen. At least you'll get a story out of it. People who are kind of magnetic to be around because like wherever they go, intrigue kind of follows.
Yes.
It'll never be a boring night with them around.
Are those people more alive?
I mean, they might be more alive, but I think they're also closer to death, and maybe that's what makes them more alive. It's I think I'm a very I was raised with this very, I think, kind of immigrant mentality of like, prioritize your safety, your family's safety, stability. It's partly why I went into pharmacy, and why I knew I was going to be a pharmacist since I was 9, was this idea of finding, a stable career, to not have to live in precarity. And the characters I write about are very much leaning into precarity. So in some ways, it's sort of an alter ego exploration of, if I gave in to my unruliest desires, what might parts of my life look like?
Another adjacent thought to that is like, I often think about this, and I talk to my friends about it. I have so many writer friends, and a lot of my writer friends are, to put it bluntly, struggling for money, right? And there is some of them, I think, in a way that I really respect, committed to the art of literature and writing as a life choice, is what I'm doing with my life at a young age, and now are in the position, sort of 10 years past that decision, 20, 30 years past that decision, where they're like, I'm sort of struggling for money now. And I guess my question to you is like, what do you think about the idea that the best art can only be made in a state when you are not in financial duress? And that, like, actually, because there can be a way of looking at things, which is like, well, okay, so Ruth went and got a really boring degree in pharmacology, or being a pharmacist, and now she's a pharmacist, and she has a 9-to-5 and a 401k. A woman like that is like leading a boring life, and therefore will make boring art. I mean, clearly this is wrong, right? I mean, your book certainly proves that. But I think that that's like a narrative that's sort of out there about having a traditional 9-to-5, where it's like, I sort of like see the method in that, and I'm just like, you know what? If you have a career and you always know you can make money, maybe that allows certain real estate in your mind to free up, which allows you to be more creative.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, everybody has certain conditions that'll work best for them. Like I think about, some writers who they bang out all their first novel drafts in like 5 weeks, or something. Like I could never, or people who have to handwrite it and then retype it. And, everyone has their kind of process, and most 99% of other people's processes sound so oppressive to someone like me, but for them it's like the only way they can do it. And I'm sure similarly some people would think my method of just kind of sitting down to a blank page, writing a novel like a poem, like they'd rather meet the firing squad than try to write a poem like that, or try to write a book like that. So I think that different conditions work best for different people, but for me it's certainly really helpful to have a kind of a traditional 9-to-5 type job structure, because I always know what hours are going to work. I mean, now everything's kind of thrown into chaos with having a baby at home, and now it's like, haha, will I ever write again? Haha, when? But before that, it's like I know exactly when my lunch is going to be. I know exactly how long it's going to take me to get to work, or what days I'm working from home. So I know I can write this morning, this evening, and I think it took some pressure off of writing the novel, because I felt like if the novel didn't sell, or if it just didn't come together, like it's not the end of the world, because I'm not applying on the academic job market. I'm not trying to get tenure. There's no one I really need to please except for myself. Or if it proved to be too experimental for traditional publishing, whatever it was, or if it was like, oh, I guess I can't write novels, I should stick to poems, all of that would be fine. And my life wouldn't collapse out from under me, partly because, and this is going to sound so, I don't want this to sound condescending or like smug at all, because I mean this very earnestly. One thing that I love about working in healthcare is that I get to spend every day at work helping to improve other people's quality of life, whatever that means for them. And so I get a lot of meaning out of my day job. And,
Right.
even if I have a shit writing day or I don't write for weeks, it means a lot to me that I can, kind of go home at the end of the day and know that I helped make someone's life better.
Mm.
And I think that makes the writing easier too, because if I have these fallow periods where nothing is going on writing wise, but I still feel like I'm contributing something to society with my day job, it feels okay. It
Right.
doesn't feel like, oh my God, my writer's block. Who am I? I'm not producing anything in the world.
Right.
So for me, I think having the stability is really, really helpful in taking the pressure off. And it often makes any writing accomplishment feel not like a surprise, but almost like an added bonus when it's like, oh, damn,
Right.
I was really busy at work that week. Like, how did I manage to bang this essay out?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
The writer's life. It's never easy and it's never the same. Everybody kind of makes it work their own way. All right. A couple more questions from me, and then we'll take some audience questions if we have them, and then we'll wrap. But a big topic that I wanted to ask you about was sex. Sex in this book. So much sex, unusual sex, violent sex, not abusive sex per se, but just violent, passionate, and unexpected sex. I would call it breakthrough sex, very well written sex. And to me, it fit into some great sex writing that I've seen from a few different authors. One that came to mind was Raven Leilani in Luster.
Yeah, love that book.
Another that came to mind was Sally Rooney. She has written some very kind of just incredibly well written. I mean, just kind of like tracking the psychology of a sex scene. I mean, both of those authors are tremendous at that. And I saw a lot of that in this book too. And I guess the way that I want to categorize it is it's sort of a way that like sexuality is like totally linked. And maybe this just seems like so bland of a comment that like everybody thinks this, but it seemed interesting to me that like the way that an explosive sexual experience is related to self-definition and a kind of breakthrough in feeling and union and intimacy is like also a breakthrough for a person searching for who they are. There's a connection between self-discovery and the pleasure of a hyper intense sexual experience. So anyway, I just wanted to give that back to you in kind of how you saw sex and like sex impacting your main character, who is someone searching for who they are.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, she doesn't know who she is. Part of the reason that she stays attached to her older sister Debbie is that Debbie is such a chaotic, obliterating presence that it relieves the narrator of having to decide who she is, because Debbie can just tell her who she is.
That's it. Yep.
Yeah, and the narrator lives in a lot of ways like Debbie. Like, she also lives hedonistically and has poor impulse control, and sometimes doesn't even know what it is that she wants per se, but just goes along with the tides of her life. And that often leads to these very chaotic sexual encounters, some of which are bad, some of which are good, many of which are life-changing in one way or another. And writing sex is always fun because I don't think that sex scenes are necessarily any different than other scenes, and that like I think that the politics around like, does this book need a sex scene? Do we need this to be this explicit? I think that's very prudish and boring. Like, do we need to describe what tree we saw? Like, do we need, I don't know, like did your mom need to give you a middle name? Like, why the like this like obsession with need? It's art.
Right.
But what I do think that the sex scenes have that's different from other scenes is that because people in America bring so much baggage to sex and to sex scenes and to sexuality, you just know that a lot of readers are going to pay extra attention to those scenes. So it's fun to write them in a way that's comic or dark or luxuriates in the language, maybe more than a scene where someone is waiting for the bus. Even though me being a poet, I have to do it everywhere because it's my toxic trait. But, so for the narrator, the sex scenes they're, I think, a way of her in some ways forgetting who she is and forgetting her body, because here's another person who can kind of just do whatever they want with it.
Yes.
But there are also scenes where she's sort of in some ways searching for who she is, right? Like she when she's in this relationship with this very earnest guy named Ronnie, who she meets at Salvation, I think people might assume that like, oh, anyone you meet at the seedy bar is going to be, a horrible, gross person, but he's actually like so pure. Like we don't even really know why he was at this bar. And she has a lot of trouble being attracted to him because she wants someone who can kind of boss her around and tell her what to do. And he's just so sweet. And she's most attracted to him when he's giving her driving lessons in the mall parking lot, because that's when he bosses her around. But then when they go back to bed together, she like tries to bring that same energy to the bedroom, and he just can't do it because he loves her too much in his own like very kind of teddy bear way.
Yeah. It's just so interesting, this character, just in terms of how she is really just on the run from herself, and whether that's drugs, her sister, sex, whatever, like a trip, to Moldova. I mean, it's just anything but be self-defined.
Yeah, anything but having a rich inner life.
Right. Oh my God. All right. We're going to go to audience questions in a second, but one last question for me. There's a great line in the book. No one had warned me how terrifying it was to get what you want. And I want to ask you now have your book published. Is it terrifying to get what you want? Or like, how has it been to have your book out there?
I mean, I'm incredibly lucky that it's been received well. The thing that was, I wouldn't say terrifying, but certainly angst inducing was, anytime you come out with a debut book, you never know how people are going to receive it, if people are going to find it. And I think especially because I had a baby right before, just a few months before my book came out, and I knew I wouldn't be able to hustle quite as hard as I normally do with the promotion. I was especially worried that like I'm going to let myself down or let my publishing team down by not doing enough to make people find the book. So it's been really heartening that it's been selling well, that people are finding it, and that not even just the sales part, but just that people are enjoying it, right? And then I'm getting nice messages and seeing pictures of people buying it in bookstores. That's the coolest thing. I think that the part that feels more terrifying is like, when will I have time to write more again? With the baby and with going back to work soon. But I think that's just every writer has that, unless they're incredibly wealthy, and don't work and have someone else who they can rely on, or just family money that they're sitting on. I'm not the only person who's ever had kids or had to balance writing with a day job. So I'll have to figure it out the way everyone else does.
Well, it's also just new material. I mean, the tank is filling up and you're going to have all this new baby material. So that'll be your next book.
Interesting. Yeah. I haven't written anything about baby stuff yet. I'm curious how that'll come into play, because like I'm sure it will, even without trying, the same way that, pharmacy stuff did here, even though I swore to myself I wasn't going to write, pharmacy books.
Boy, you went the other way on that one.
Yeah. Thinking of having no inner life and not knowing yourself.
All right, let's do a couple questions from the audience. If our producer can throw them up. Let's see. Audience question: will you write in the same tone /channel /genre next time? Would you ever jump lane to a different genre, and which one and why?
I'm very chaotic in that I do write in a lot of genres. My first book was a book of poems, and I also write essays. So sometimes they're personal essays, braiding in, my own experiences. Like, for example, with like, I had a column at Catapult called Eldest Immigrant Daughter, which was about the immigrant experience through the eyes of internet culture. Other times I write more investigative stuff or op-eds, like about the war in Ukraine or disparities in HIV care, because of my day job as an HIV pharmacist. So I love writing essays. I love writing poems. In terms of next book, we'll have to see. I definitely want to write another novel, but I have to get another voice stuck in my head first.
Yeah. All right, let's do one more question from the audience. What would you say to other debut novelists to keep them going?
The thing that kept me going was just reading a ton, and just reading a lot of novels and just books in any genre, and thinking like, oh man, I want to make someone feel the way this made me feel. And that's the thing, I think, for a lot of us, is you read an incredible book and you're like, oh my God, like the way that I feel right now, like it's almost as if like I was born to read this book. Like, all of life was worth it to get to this moment, which sounds so schmaltzy, but I think that's how it can really feel sometimes. And, which isn't to say that I think my book is going to be that for plenty of people, but knowing that when you're writing your own book, that comparing your drafts to the finished version of your favorite books is just so unhelpful. Because I would do that all the time when I was drafting, as being like, oh my God, this is so much worse than, Jesus' Son or Lust or whatever. Like, these are not even in the same, like there's a Russian proverb for when you think someone's gross that goes like, I wouldn't shit in the same football field as him. And it's like, sometimes it's like, damn, these books would not sit in the same football field. Like my book and this book could not be anywhere different. But, it's not helpful because you're comparing something that's been through so much vetting, so, agent, editor, all the years of the author's life to your first or second or third draft, and to just try to see where your own process goes and read a lot and know that reading is very instructive. And for me, I think the most instructive thing. And, honestly, underlining things that I like in other people's books or things that I thought weren't working in mine, I would look for how other people did it. Like, like, for example, it doesn't really come naturally to me to describe like, oh, how was the weather? What time of year was it? What kind of tree did we pass? What kind of car did this person drive? Those aren't details that stick out to me as much. So I would literally look at how other writers I like did it, underline it, and then try to do a version of that in my own book. So all the lessons are sometimes just right there.
I love it. Thank you. That is amazing advice. Folks, we're going to wrap now. I want to encourage you to buy this wonderful, wonderful book. Look at that. Look at that.
My baby needs shoes. Buy my book.
My baby needs shoes. All right. Awesome. Ruth, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you. I love it. I love you coming on here. And I'm telling you, I always listen to tons and tons of interviews of other authors that I have on the show. And I always wonder, in the actual interview, will they give me the same answers they've given everybody else, or will they give me something fresh? And it has been all fresh from you. So thank you for just being fresh on air.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me for the 100th episode. So special.
Yes. I forgot again. 100th episode.
Yeah, it's so exciting. And I'm so excited for your novel.
Thank you very much. So look, we're going to close with the question that I ask everybody at the end of all my interviews, which is, imagine there is an ideal reader for All Night Pharmacy, the reader who is picking up everything you're putting down, getting all the jokes, getting all the references, can relate, and is just feeling it. And they finish reading, to close the book, put it down on their lap. Describe for me, in a word, a phrase at most, but maybe even just a word, what is the feeling that reader has?
Seen, I think. I'm sure I'm not the only person to say that, but I think, that's my favorite thing when I'm reading a book that really does it for me, is just to feel like, oh man, this person gets me, or they see something in myself that maybe I didn't see, or that I didn't know how to put into words the way they did. Like, they've captured something essential about being alive. That's the best feeling.
I love that answer. And I just want to take one more moment to make a comment about that, because I heard you say in a different interview, you quoted this phrase that I'd never heard before, which I love, which is something like, the ecstasy of being seen and the mortification of being known.
Yeah.
Which I thought was like amazing.
I didn't come up with that. It's a meme.
Yeah, but can you like unpack that for me a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think we can all relate to that to some degree, right? Like, it's almost like the D.W. Winnicott thing about children, right? Where like hide and seek is fun, but there's also this terror of what if no one finds me. It's this idea that like the ecstasy of being seen, like when someone sees you for who you are, it's like, oh yes, that strong connection. But then it's also, the mortifying ordeal of being known. It's also like, yuck, like get your tentacles out of me. Because it's always both, right? We want to be seen, we want to be understood, but we don't want to be read for filth, right? Or we don't want to feel like we're that porous that anyone can see right through us.
Well, your book fortunately gives the reader the chance to be seen but not known. Right? Is that fair? Or
yeah, I think that's fair. I wouldn't purport to know anybody's experience, but I hope that they kind of pick up what I'm putting down and feel like it captured something that rings true for them.
Well, I think it is. It's really working. The book is everywhere right now. I mean, I feel like you are just like that it author right now, and you're just like on all the shows, on all the lists, and it's just so exciting.
Oh, thank you. That makes me happy to hear.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you.
Because I never know when friends tell me that, it's like, is it just because you follow me on Instagram and you just see everything I'm the one reposting?
Right, totally. I feel that sometimes on social media, that you're just like, it's like this weird echo chamber, and it's just me and my friends just loving each other. But no, it's out there in the world. Everybody is talking about it. Folks, please buy this book. It's amazing. Ruth, thank you for making time for us today and coming on Thoughtful Bro.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun. And yeah, I can't wait for your book.
Thank you so much. All right, folks, we'll see you next week. Bye. Thanks for